The drill bit screamed against the asteroid rock as Jake Morrison guided it deeper into the tunnel. Sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cold air pumping through the ventilation system. He had been working the deep mines of Ceresavon for 3 years now, and his body knew the rhythm of the work. Pull the trigger, push forward, let the machine do its job. The mining colony sat like a metal tick on the surface of the asteroid. 2,000 people called this place home. The home was a generous word for the cramped quarters and recycled air. Jake had come here after his discharge from the Earth Marines. The pay was good, and the work kept his hands busy. Most days. That was enough. His cum unit crackled to life. "Morrison, you down there?" The voice belonged to Lisa Carter, the head of colony security. She sounded tense. "Yeah, what's wrong?" Jake shut off the drill and wiped his hands on his coveralls. "We've got ships on the scanner. Big ones. They're not responding to our hails." Jake felt his stomach drop. Ships out here meant trouble. The asteroid belt was too far from Earth for casual visitors, and pirates knew better than to hit a mining operation. The companies had too much money and too many guns. "How many ships?" he asked. 6. Maybe 7. Hard to tell with all the interference. "They're putting out." Jake grabbed his gear and started moving toward the main shaft. His military training kicked in without thought. Get to high ground. Assess the situation. Make a plan. The elevator ride to the surface took 5 minutes. 5 minutes of listening to the cum chatter as more and more people noticed the ships. The panic was starting to build in their voices. When the elevator doors opened, Jake stepped into chaos. People ran in every direction. Some headed for the emergency bunkers. Others tried to reach the small transport ships docked at the far end of the colony. Security guards shouted orders that nobody listened to. Jake found Lisa at the main command center. She stood in front of a wall of screens showing the approaching ships. They were beautiful in a deadly way. Long and sleek, they looked like they were made of black crystal. They moved through space with a grace that human ships could never match. "Any word from Earth?" Jake asked. Lisa shook her head. "Too far out. Even if we could get a message through, help wouldn't arrive for weeks." The first ship reached the docking bay. It attached itself to the station with a sound like breaking glass. Then the screaming started. Jake grabbed a rifle from the security locker and checked the charge. Full power. He had fought aliens before during his time in the Marines, but those had been small raids on outer colonies. This felt different. It felt organized. The security monitors showed the docking bay. Creatures poured out of the alien ship. They walked on 2 legs like humans, but that was where the similarity ended. They were tall, maybe 8 feet high. Their skin looked like scales that caught the light and threw it back in different colors. They had long necks and faces that stretched forward into snouts filled with sharp teeth, but it was their eyes that made Jake's blood run cold. These were not the eyes of animals. These creatures were smart. They moved with purpose, checking corners, covering each other's movements. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. "Dragons," whispered Ben Hughes, the young engineer standing next to Jake. "They look like dragons." The creatures spread through the colony with military precision. They killed anyone who fought back, but they also captured many people alive. Jake watched on the monitors as groups of colonists were herded together and marked with some kind of device. "They're sorting us," Jake said. "The weak ones they kill. The strong ones they keep." Lisa looked at him. "Keep for what?" Before Jake could answer, the command center door exploded inward. 3 of the creatures entered, their weapons pointed at the humans inside. One of them, larger than the others, stepped forward. "What?" It wore what? Looked like armor made of the same black crystal as their ships. The creature spoke. But the words were not in any human language. They sounded like wind through broken glass. Then a small device on its chest began to glow, and when it spoke again, Jake could understand the words. "I am Commander Vorthok of the Drakari Empire. You will lay down your weapons and submit to selection." Jake kept his rifle pointed at the creature's center mass. "Selection for what?" Vorthok tilted his head, studying Jake with interest. "You have courage, human. That is good. You will be tested in the trials." "What trials?" "The trial of worthiness. You will fight our warriors in combat. If you prove strong enough, you will earn the right to serve us. If not, you will feed us. Lisa stepped forward. You can't just take people. We're citizens of Earth. Vorthok made a sound that might have been laughter. Earth is far from here, small mammal, and we have taken many species before you. Some fight well and earn our respect. Most do not. The other creatures moved through the command center, checking each person, pushed aside the older colonists and the injured. But they marked Jake, Lisa, Ben, and several others with glowing tags attached to their wrists. You are selected, Vorthok said. You will come with us to Paraxis, the heart of our empire. There you will learn if your species has any worth. Jake looked around the room at the bodies of his friends and co-workers. The rifle in his hands felt useless against these creatures and their advanced weapons. But he was still alive, and that meant he still had a chance. How many species have you tested? He asked. Vorthok's eyes gleamed. 47 species have faced the trials. 12 earned the right to serve us as gladiators. The others became food for our young, and you always win. Always. Our Drakari. We are the apex of evolution. We are dragons, and dragons bow to no one. Jake nodded slowly. He let his rifle drop to the floor and raised his hands. But his mind was already working, already planning. These creatures thought they knew humans. They thought they understood what they had captured. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The holding cell smelled like burned metal and fear. Jake sat on the hard bench and watched the other prisoners. 13 humans had survived the selection process. Now they were trapped in a cage barely large enough for half that number. The ship had been traveling for 6 days. Jake knew because he counted every meal they brought. The Drakari fed them twice a day with some kind of gray paste that tasted like nothing. It kept them alive. But that was all. Lisa Carter sat next to him, her security chief uniform torn and dirty. Ben Hughes curled up in the corner, still shaking from what he had seen. Kate Phillips, the colony medic, tried to tend to the wounded with no supplies and no hope. Where do you think they're taking us? Ben asked for the 100th time. There. Home world, Jake said. Commander Vorthok called it Paraxis. What do you think will happen to us there? Jake had been thinking about that question for 6 days. The Drakari had mentioned trials and gladiators. They had talked about 47 species and how only 12 had earned the right to serve. The math was not encouraging. We'll find out soon enough, he said. The ship shuddered as it changed course. Through the small window in their cell, Jake could see a planet growing larger. It was red and orange with swirling clouds that glowed like fire. Even from space, he could see the volcanic activity that covered the surface. Jesus, whispered Lisa. Look at that place. As they got closer, Jake could make out structures floating above the planet's surface. Cities hung in the air, connected by bridges of light. Drakari flew between them on their powerful wings, their scales catching the red light from below. Ship docked with a sound like breaking thunder. Jake felt the artificial gravity shift as they connected to the station. Heavy footsteps approached their cell. Commander Vorthok appeared outside the bars, along with 2 other Drakari that Jake had not seen before. One wore robes covered in symbols that seemed to move on their own. The other had scars across his face and arms that looked like they came from many battles. Welcome to Paraxis, humans, Vorthok said through his translation device. We're about to meet the rulers of the greatest empire in the galaxy. The cell door opened with a hiss. Armed guards herded the prisoners out and through the corridors of what looked like a massive space station. The walls were made of the same black crystal as the ship's, but they pulsed with inner light. They entered a vast chamber that took Jake's breath away. The ceiling stretched up so high that clouds formed near the top. Thousands of Drakari-filled seats carved into the walls. At the center of the room sat a throne made of what looked like solidified fire. On the throne sat the largest Drakar Jake had ever seen. Her scales were gold instead of the dark colors of the others. When she moved, light rippled across her body like water. Power radiated from her in waves that made the air itself seem to bend. I am Empress Zethkalar, the Golden Scale, she said. Her voice filled the chamber without any need for amplification. "I rule the Drakari Empire and all the species that serve us." The prisoners were forced to their knees before the throne. Jake kept his head up, studying everything he could see. Guard positions, exit routes, the layout of the chamber, old habits from his military training. "You are here because your species shows promise," the Empress continued. "We have conquered many worlds and tested many peoples. Most disappoint us. They break under pressure. They lack the strength to serve." She stood and walked down from her throne. Each step made the floor vibrate. "Some species prove worthy. They fight with courage. They adapt to our ways. They earn the right to join our empire as gladiators and servants." Jake noticed that the scarred Drakari was watching him closely. The creature's eyes never left Jake's face, as if trying to read his thoughts. "The trial of worthiness will test your strength, your cunning, and your will to survive," the Empress said. "You will face our warriors in single combat in the great arena. Those who prove themselves will live. Those who fail will feed our young." She stopped in front of Jake and leaned down until her face was inches from his. "You interest me, human. You do not cower like the others. Tell me your name." "Jake Morrison." "Have you fought before, Jake Morrison?" "Yes." "Good. I look forward to seeing what your species can do." The guards dragged them away to another holding area. This one was bigger than the ship's cell, but not by much. Thick bars separated them from a corridor where Drakari guards walked back and forth. "Did you see the size of that place?" Ben whispered. "There must have been 10,000 of them watching us." Kate was examining the walls of their new prison. "These bars look like they could stop a tank," she said. Lisa sat down next to Jake. "What are you thinking?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. He was thinking about the way the guards moved, the way they held their weapons, the way they talked to each other when they thought the humans were not listening. "They're arrogant," he said finally. "What do you mean?" "Look at how they treat us, like we're animals in a zoo. They don't see us as a real threat." "We're not a real threat," Ben said. "Look at them. They're 8 feet tall with claws and breath weapons. We're just soft mammals." Jake stood and walked to the bars. One of the guards was approaching. The creature was young, Jake could tell. His scales were bright and unmarked by battle scars. He carried his weapon casually, like he was on a parade ground instead of guarding dangerous prisoners. "That's their weakness," Jake said quietly. "What is?" "They think they know us. They think they understand what humans are capable of." The young guard stopped in front of their cell and said something in the Drakari language. The words sounded mocking. The guard's friends laughed. Jake smiled and nodded at the guard, like he was agreeing with whatever had been said. The guard seemed surprised by the friendly response. He said something else, and his friends laughed harder. "What are you doing?" Lisa asked. "Learning," Jake said. "Watching. Listening." "Learning what?" Jake turned away from the bars and sat back down. "Everything I can. How they move. How they think. What makes them confident? Why? Because in a few days I'm going to have to kill one of them, and I want to know exactly how to do it." The other prisoners stared at him. Kate was the first to speak. "Jake, these things are killing machines. They've conquered 47 species. 47 species that fought them the way they expected to be fought," Jake said. "With honor. With rules. With fairness." He looked around at the faces of his fellow prisoners. "But I'm not planning to fight fair." The arena was carved into the side of an active volcano. Jake could feel the heat rising from the lava far below as the guards pushed him and the other prisoners through the tunnels. The walls glowed red from the molten rock that flowed behind. They emerged into a pit that took his breath away. The arena floor was a circle of black stone, 50 yards across. Above them, thousands of Drakari-filled seats that spiraled up the volcanic walls. Their scales caught the firelight and threw it back in waves of color. "Holy hell," whispered Ben Hughes as he stared up at the crowd. The prisoners were shoved into a holding pen at the edge of the arena. Through the bars, Jake could see weapons scattered across the fighting ground. Swords, spears, clubs made of metal and stone. All of them looked old and worn from use. Commander Vorthok appeared in front of their cage. "The trials begin now," he announced. "You will face our warriors, one by one. The weapons in the arena are yours to use. Fight well, and you may live to see another day." A gate opened in the arena wall. The first Drakari warrior stepped out, and the crowd roared. He was young, maybe the same age as the guards who had been mocking them. His scales were deep blue, with silver edges. He carried no weapons, relying on his natural claws and the fire that all Drakari could breathe. "Who fights first?" Vorthok asked. Before anyone could answer, Ben stepped forward. "I'll go." Jake grabbed his arm. "Ben, no, let me. I'm dead anyway," Ben said.
Ace.
His voice was steady, but Jake could see the fear in his eyes. "Please, this way. I die fighting." The gate to their cage opened. Ben walked out into the arena, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The crowd grew quiet, waiting to see what the human would do. Ben picked up a sword from the ground. It was heavy in his hands, made for someone larger and stronger than him. He held it like he had never used a weapon before, which was probably true. The Drakari warrior, who had been introduced as Kelth the Swift, circled Ben slowly. He was in no hurry. This was entertainment, not real combat. "Fight with honor, small mammal," Kelth called out. "Show us what your species can do." Ben raised the sword and charged. It was brave and stupid and exactly what Kelth expected. Drakari sidestepped easily and raked his claws across Ben's back. Ben screamed and stumbled forward. Kelth could have ended it there, but he was playing to the crowd. He let Ben turn around, let him raise the sword again. The crowd loved it. They breathed jets of flame into the air and roared their approval. Ben tried 3 more attacks. Each time, Kelth moved away and added another wound. Ben's shirt was soaked with blood, but he kept fighting. Jake had to admire his courage even as he watched his friend die. The end came when Ben finally collapsed from blood loss. Kelth stood over him and opened his mouth. The blast of fire turned Ben to ash in seconds. The crowd went wild. His arms and accepted their cheers. It had been a good show. 2 more humans followed. Lisa Carter fought a warrior called Drex, the Bonebreaker. She lasted longer than Ben, using her security training to stay alive for almost 10 minutes. But the result was the same. Fire and ash and cheering crowds. Kate Phillips tried to surrender, but surrender was not allowed in the arena. Her opponent, a female Drakari named Vis the Cruel, killed her quickly, was almost merciful. Then it was Jake's turn. The warrior waiting for him was bigger than the others. His scales were black with red edges and scars covered his arms and chest. This was not a young fighter looking for glory. This was a veteran. "I am Scarth the Bone Crusher," he announced. "I have killed 43 enemies in this arena. Will be 44. Jake walked to the center of the arena. He looked at the weapons scattered around and chose nothing. Instead, he picked up a handful of sand from the arena floor. "No weapon, human?" Scarth laughed. "You think to fight me with? Your bare hands?" "Something like that," Jake said. The crowd was buzzing with excitement. This human was either incredibly brave or completely insane. Either way, it would be entertaining. Scarth began the ritual combat greeting that all Drakari warriors used. He spread his arms wide, tilted his head back, and opened his mouth to breathe fire. It was a display of power and a sign of respect for his opponent. Jake threw the sand directly into Scarth's open mouth. The effect was immediate. Scarth choked and stumbled backward, clawing at his throat. Sand and flame do not mix well. Instead of a controlled blast of fire, Scarth's breath came out as smoke and sparks. The crowd fell silent. This was not how combat was supposed to begin. Jake did not wait for Scarth to recover. He grabbed a broken spear from the ground and drove it into the gap between Scarth's shoulder scales. The Drakari screamed and swung his claws wildly. Jake rolled away and came up with a rock in his hand. Scarth tried to breathe fire again, but his throat was still full of sand. Jake threw the rock at his head, then dove between his legs and grabbed another weapon. What followed was not the honorable combat the Drakari expected. Jake fought like a wild animal. He used every dirty trick he could think of. To corner him, Jake threw sand in his eyes. When Scarth tried to use his fire breath, Jake hit him in the throat with a club. The crowd was not cheering anymore. They watched in horrified silence as the humans systematically destroyed their warrior. Scarth was strong and skilled, but he had been trained to fight with honor. He announced his attacks. He gave his opponent time to prepare, followed the ancient rules of combat that made the Drakari great warriors. Jake followed no rules at all. The end came when Scarth tried one final fire blast. Jake had been waiting for it. He rolled to the side and came up behind the Drakari. A thrust with a broken sword found the gap in Scarth's neck scales. Scarth fell to his knees, then onto his face. Blood pooled around his head. Jake stood over the body, breathing hard. He looked up at the silent crowd, then at the royal box, where Empress Zethkalar sat watching. "Is that how it's done?" he called out. The silence stretched on. Commander Vorthok spoke into the quiet arena. "Human wins," but nobody cheered. The crowd stared down at Jake like he was something they had never seen before. Something that did not belong in their world of honor and ritual combat. Jake picked up Scarth's weapons and walked back to the gate. As he passed the other prisoners, he saw the fear in their eyes. They were not just afraid of the Drakari anymore, they were afraid of him. Jake sat in his new cell and listened to the Drakari argue. They thought the walls blocked sound, but Jake had learned to recognize the patterns of their language. 3 weeks of listening had taught him more than they realized. The cell was bigger than the holding pen with an actual bed and clean water. Winners got better treatment than prisoners, but it was still a cage. Lisa Carter sat across from him, one of only 4 humans left alive. Her face was pale from her own fight 2 days ago. She had copied Jake's tactics and survived, but barely. "They're scared," she said quietly. "Good," Jake replied. "No, not good. Scared animals are dangerous. They might decide we're too much trouble and just kill us all." Jake was cleaning sand from under his fingernails. He had used it again in his second fight, along with several other tricks the Drakari had never seen. Word was spreading through their society. The humans did not fight like any species they had conquered before. "Let me worry about that." "He," said Lisa, studied his face. "What's happening to you, Jake? You're not the same person who worked the mines." Jake looked up at her. The question was fair. He had been asking himself the same thing. 3 weeks ago, he had been a simple miner who kept his head down and did his job. Now he was something else, something that could kill without hesitation, and sleep peacefully afterward. "I'm becoming what I need to be," he said. "And what's that? Something they can't predict, something they can't understand." The cell door opened before Lisa could respond. Commander Vorthok entered with 2 guards. His usual confidence was missing. Jake could smell the fear on him, sharp and metallic. "The Empress wants to see you," Vorthok said. They walked through corridors Jake had not seen before. These were deeper in the complex, closer to the lava flows that powered the city. The heat made sweat run down his back. The Empress waited in a smaller chamber than the great throne room. Only a dozen other Drakari were present, all of them wearing the decorations of high rank. Jake recognized the scarred warrior who had been watching him during his first audience. "Jake Morrison," Empress Zethkalar said, "you have caused quite a stir in our society." "Have I? 5 victories in 3 weeks, each more disturbing than the last." Jake said nothing. Let her talk. Information was always useful. "My advisors tell me you are learning our language," she continued. "Some of it. What do you think of our civilization?" Jake looked around the chamber. The walls were covered with carvings showing Drakari victories over other species. Proud warriors standing over defeated enemies. Honorable combat. Clean kills. "You're stuck," he said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several Drakari made hissing sounds. "Explain," the Empress said. "You've been winning the same way for thousands of years. Same tactics, same rules, same expectations. It's made you soft." The scarred warrior stepped forward. "I am General Koroth. I have conquered 17 worlds for the Empire. Do I look soft to you?" Jake studied him. old scars, missing scales that had been regrown, burn marks from battles fought long ago. This one was dangerous. You look experienced, Jake said. But experience fighting honorable enemies doesn't help against someone who won't play by your rules. And you think your barbaric fighting style makes you superior? I think it makes me alive. Korath's hand moved to his weapon. Perhaps we should test that theory. Perhaps we should, Jake agreed. The Empress raised a hand, stopping the confrontation. Not yet, General. I have other plans for our human. She turned back to Jake. You interest me, Morrison. Most species we conquer try to become like us. They adopt our ways, our codes of honor, but you seem determined to remain ... what you are. What I am works, does it? You have won 5 fights. True, but Pirith, the arena master, awaits you next. He has never lost, never even been wounded. What will your tricks accomplish against perfection? Jake smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. I guess we'll find out. 2 days later, Jake stood in the arena again. Crowd was larger this time. Word of the human who fought without honor had spread across the city. He came to see if he would finally meet his match. Pirith, the arena master, was everything the Empress had promised, tall even for a Dracari, with golden scales that had never been marked by an enemy weapon. He moved like liquid fire, every step perfect and controlled. I have studied your previous fights, Pirith announced. Your tricks will not work on me. We'll see, Jake said. The fight began with Pirith's ritual display. But this time, he kept his mouth closed and his eyes on Jake. No sand-throwing wood. Work here. Jake picked up 2 weapons, a curved sword and a spiked club. Pirith selected nothing, relying on his natural weapons and superior skill. They circled each other slowly. Pirith was patient, waiting for Jake to make the first move. When Jake finally attacked, Pirith was ready. He deflected the sword strike and countered with his claws. Jake barely rolled away in time. The crowd began to cheer. Finally, a real fight. Finally, the human would be put in his place. But Jake was not trying to win with weapons. He was studying Pirith's movements, learning his patterns. Every block, every counter. Every step taught Jake something new. After 10 minutes of careful fighting, Jake suddenly threw both weapons away and charged Pirith empty-handed. It looked like desperation, and Pirith responded accordingly. He opened his arms wide to catch the foolish human. Jake dropped to his knees and slid between Pirith's legs. As he passed underneath, he grabbed 2 handfuls of sand and came up behind the arena master. Before Pirith could turn around, Jake jumped onto his back and wrapped his arms around the Dracari's neck. Then he began to talk, not in English. In the Dracari language he had been learning. Your scales are dull, he whispered. Your fire is weak. Your ancestors are ashamed of you. The words hit Pirith harder than any physical blow. In Dracari culture, such insults were unthinkable. No honorable warrior would ever speak such words, even to an enemy. Pirith went into a rage, spun and clawed at his back, trying to dislodge Jake. But rage made him careless. Jake waited for the right moment, then drove his thumbs into the soft spots behind Pirith's ear holes. The arena master collapsed, his perfect fighting form destroyed by fury and pain. Jake rode him down and kept pressure on the nerve clusters, until Pirith stopped moving. The crowd was silent again. Their perfect champion lay unconscious in the sand, defeated not by superior skill, but by words and psychology. Jake stood up and looked around the arena. Anyone else? He called out. No one answered. Even the Empress was staring at him with something that might have been fear. Jake had not just won another fight. He had broken something in their minds. The idea that honor and skill always won. The belief that their way was the only way. As the guards escorted him back to his cell, Jake could hear the Dracari talking in hushed voices. They were trying to understand what they had just witnessed, but understanding required accepting that everything they believed about combat and strength might be wrong, and that was a truth too dangerous for most of them to face. The names spread through Paraxis like a plague. The Cold Death, that was what the Dracari called Jake now, not the human, not the gladiator. The Cold Death. Jake heard them whisper it when they thought he could not understand their language. Heard it in the corridors, in the guard stations, in the feeding halls where the Drakari gathered. Fear had a smell, and the entire city reeked of it. He sat in his cell and counted the days since his last fight. 12 days. The Empress had stopped sending challengers after Pirith. No warrior wanted to face the thing that killed without honor. Without mercy, without the warrior's spirit they held sacred, Lisa sat beside him, her own reputation growing darker with each passing day. She had learned to fight like Jake, using fear and pain as weapons. The other two surviving humans, Steve Brown and Amy Clark, watched them both with growing unease. "They're planning something," Lisa said quietly. Jake nodded. He had noticed the increased patrols, the hushed meetings, the way the guards avoided looking at them directly. "They want us gone, but they're afraid to face us in the arena. So what do? They change the rules." Captain Threx arrived that evening with a squad of 20 guards, more than had ever come to their cell before. He stood outside the bars and spoke in heavily accented English. "You will be moved to new quarters," he announced. "Where?" Jake asked. "Deeper, more secure." Jake looked at the number of guards. 20 armed Drakari to move for humans. That told him everything he needed to know. "You're not moving us," he said. "You're trying to kill us." Threx's hand moved to his weapon. "The Empress has decided your trials are complete. We have proven your species unworthy of service, have we? Fight without honor. You kill without respect. You are not warriors. You are disease." Jake stood slowly. The guards tensed, weapons rising. "You know what the real problem is, Threx? Speak quickly. You finally realized we weren't trying to join your empire? We're studying it." Yeah. The cell door opened with a violent screech of metal. Guards poured in, energy weapons humming with power. But Jake was already moving. He had been planning for this moment since his first day in captivity. Every guard rotation, every weak point in the walls, every ventilation shaft and maintenance tunnel. 3 months of observation had mapped every inch of this facility. Jake threw himself at the nearest wall panel, hitting the release he had spotted weeks ago. Panel slid away, revealing a service tunnel barely wide enough for a human body. As energy blasts scorched the air behind him, Jake disappeared into the depths of the facility. The hunt began immediately. Alarms wailed throughout the complex. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. Threx's voice echoed from speakers, ordering a complete lockdown. But Jake was already 3 levels down, moving through passages the Drakari had forgotten existed. Their arrogance worked against them here. They had built this place, assuming no prisoner would ever escape their cells. The maintenance areas were unguarded and poorly monitored. Jake emerged in a storage room, filled with cleaning supplies. Perfect. He gathered what he needed and began his real work. The first explosion came. 6 hours later, a food preparation area erupted in flames, sending toxic smoke through half the complex. The Drakari evacuated that section, following their safety protocols exactly as Jake had expected. The second blast followed 20 minutes later, a power junction that controlled the lights in the detention levels. Darkness swallowed the lower floors. Threx found the third bomb before it exploded, a small device attached to a water recycling plant. But removing it triggered the real trap, a cloud of cleaning chemicals that turned the air into poison. Threx all maintenance tunnels. Threx ordered over the cum system. Flood them with knockout gas. Jake had anticipated that too. He was no longer in the tunnels. While the Drakari chased shadows in the walls, Jake had taken a dead guard's uniform and walked into their command center. The disguise worked because the Drakari could not imagine a human bold enough to walk among them. Their own certainty made them blind. Jake spent 2 hours in the command center, learning their security systems and planting more surprises. When he finally left, he carried a guard's weapon and a complete map of the facility. The psychological warfare began on the second day. Jake left messages written in Drakari script in places where only guards would find them. Messages that violated their deepest cultural taboos, words that no honorable being would ever write. Guards began finding their equipment rearranged in patterns that meant death and dishonor in Drakari religion. Food supplies were contaminated with substances that made them taste like decay. Weapons were found with their power cells drained and their casings covered in symbols of shame. "It's just one human," General Korath snarled during an emergency meeting that Jake overheard through a ventilation grate. "How is one primitive mammal terrorizing an entire military installation? 'Cause he doesn't think like us, Commander." Vorthok replied. "He has no honor to constrain him, no rules to follow, no code to limit his actions. Then we fight him the same way. Can you do that, General? Can you abandon everything that makes you Drakari?" The silence that followed told Jake everything he needed to know. They were trapped by their own nature. Even when facing an enemy who used no rules, they could not abandon their own. On the third day, Jake freed the surviving humans. Lisa, Steve, and Amy were being held in a maximum security cell 5 levels down. Jake reached them by crawling through a waste disposal chute that no Drakari would ever use. "Jake," Lisa whispered as he peered through the floor grate. "How are you doing this?" "Practice," he said, handing her a stolen energy weapon. "Ready to go home? Are we getting off this planet?" Jake smiled. It was the same cold expression. That had become his trademark in the arena. "We're not leaving empty-handed. First, we're going to take something that belongs to us." "What? Revenge?" By the 4th day, the facility was in chaos. Half the guards refused to patrol alone. Other half jumped at shadows. 3 officers had requested transfer to combat units, claiming they would rather face an honorable enemy than continue hunting the human. Jake had become exactly what Threx had called him, a disease, a plague of fear that infected everything. It touched, but he was not finished yet. The real work was about to begin. The Imperial Palace floated above the lava seas like a black crystal mountain. Jake watched it through stolen surveillance equipment as he planned his final move. 7 days of guerrilla warfare had brought the detention facility to its knees. Now it was time to send a message that would reach far beyond Paraxis. Lisa crouched beside him in the maintenance shaft, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. "Jake, this is insane. That place has 1,000 guards." "Guards who think like guards," Jake replied. "They'll expect an attack from outside, a frontal assault, ships and weapons and military tactics. And what are we doing instead? To the service tunnels that connected the palace to the city's infrastructure, we're going to walk in the front door." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The palace hosted state ceremonies every 10 days, honoring the Drakari's military victories. Hundreds of servants prepared food, cleaned chambers, and maintained equipment. In the chaos of preparation, for humans in stolen uniforms would be invisible, they entered through a waste processing facility that connected to the palace's lower levels. Jake had studied the building plans for days, memorizing every passage and service corridor. The Drakari's rigid caste system worked in their favor. Higher caste Drakari never looked at servants, and lower caste workers were too afraid to question anyone who seemed to belong. Steve Brown and Amy Clark followed silently, carrying cleaning supplies that hid their weapons. They had learned to trust Jake's planning completely. Too much depended on it. The palace was preparing for the celebration of their conquest of the Vexery system. Banners hung from crystal walls. Tables groaned under exotic foods. Gari nobles gathered in their finest scales and jewelry. Jake led his team through servant corridors toward the main ceremonial hall. They passed dozens of workers who never gave them a second glance. Invisibility was the best disguise. "Target is the communication center," Jake whispered as they climbed a service ladder. "We take control of their broadcast system." "To say what?" Lisa asked. "The truth." They reached the communication center during the height of the ceremony. The technicians on duty were watching the festivities on their screens instead of monitoring their equipment. Jake and his team entered through a maintenance hatch behind the main console. The Drakari.
Oh.
Technicians died quickly and quietly. Jake had learned that sometimes efficiency was more important than fear. He plugged a stolen data device into their main transmitter and began uploading everything he had recorded over the past months. Guard rotations, facility layouts, weapon specifications, cultural weaknesses, battle tactics, everything a human military force would need to defeat the Drakari Empire. Signal is transmitting, Steve reported from his position at the door, but it'll take 20 minutes to upload everything. Then we hold for 20 minutes, Jake said. The alarm started before they had uploaded half the data. Red lights flashed through the palace as guards poured into the corridors. Jake had expected this. Nothing stayed. Secret forever. Lisa, Amy, hold the main entrance, he ordered. Steve, keep that upload running. I'll handle the rest. Jake disappeared into the ventilation system as energy weapons began firing in the corridor outside. But he wasn't running away. He was moving toward the ceremonial hall where Empress Zethkalar was addressing her nobles. The hall was magnificent. Crystal columns stretched up toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars above Paraxis. Thousands of Drakari-filled seats arranged in perfect circles around a central stage. The Empress stood at the center, her golden scales catching the light from floating chandeliers. Jake emerged from a ceiling vent directly above the stage. He dropped down behind the Empress's throne, invisible to the crowd, but perfectly positioned for what came next. Empress Zethkalar, he called out in perfect Drakari. The hall fell silent. Every head turned toward the sound of the human voice speaking their sacred language. Guards rushed toward the stage, but Jake was already moving. He vaulted over the throne and landed next to the Empress. A small device appeared in his hand. The same explosive compound he had been using for sabotage, but concentrated into a single deadly package. One step closer, and we both die, Jake announced to the advancing guards. The Empress stood perfectly still. Her golden eyes studied Jake with a mixture of fear and fascination. You came here to kill me? I came here to show you what you really caught, Jake replied. You thought you were testing another species for your gladiator pits? But you made a mistake. What mistake? You assumed we wanted to join your empire. Jake activated a holographic projector he had stolen from the communication center. Images filled the air above the crowd. Battle plans, technical specifications, detailed analyses of Drakari weaknesses. Everything you see is being transmitted. To Earth right now, Jake continued. Your locations, your numbers, your technology, your tactics. But most importantly, your limitations. The crowd watched in horror as the display showed exactly how Jake had exploited their honor-based culture, how their predictable behavior patterns could be turned against them, how their rigid military structure created vulnerabilities that a more flexible enemy could exploit. You conquered 47 species because they all tried to beat you at your own game, Jake said. They adopted your rules. They fought with honor, accepted your definition of strength. He looked out at the thousands of faces staring back. At him, humans don't do that. We adapt. We evolve. We become whatever we need to be to survive. And what have you become? The Empress asked quietly. Jake smiled. It was the same cold expression that had haunted the dreams of Drakari warriors for months. I've become the thing that's going to teach your empire what real predators look like. The upload finished. 23 minutes of detailed intelligence about the Drakari Empire was now racing toward Earth at faster-than-light speeds. Human military commanders would soon know everything they needed to know about their new enemy. The transmission is complete, Jake announced. Earth will receive this data in 6 months. Your invasion fleets will be waiting for them. What invasion fleets? The Empress demanded. The ones you're going to send after us, because that's what empires like yours do. You can't let this insult stand. You'll come to Earth with everything you have. Jake's smile widened, and we'll be ready for you. The explosive device in his hand began to glow. Not enough to kill everyone in the hall, but enough to make his final point. The next time you fight humans, you won't be fighting miners and engineers. You'll be fighting soldiers who know exactly what you are and exactly how to kill you. The device detonated. Jake vanished in a flash of light and smoke. When the smoke cleared, he was gone. The communication center was empty. Lisa, Steve, and Amy had disappeared along with the stolen Drakari ship, but the message remained. Humanity knew about the Drakari Empire now. They knew about the trials, the arrogance, the weaknesses, and most importantly, They knew that the dragons weren't invincible. They had learned this from the real monster they had created by trying to break a human who refused to break. The war was coming, and the Drakari had just taught their enemy exactly how to win it.